Okay, so this is what we will explore briefly today. Contemporary significance of Sri Aurobindo's spiritual view of nation and nationalism. So my part mostly will be about giving some pointers as to Sri Aurobindo's spiritual view of nation and nationalism. The significance part I leave for some reflection, but also maybe it can come at the end in the form of a couple of question and answers. Or maybe it will come as we start exploring. So I thought I will just start with this part. As I was just describing in the brief, sort of introduction to Sri Aurobindo as a revolutionary, during this Alipur trial, during this year, the year in which he was imprisoned, and the charges were serious. The charges were of sedition. And in fact, Sri Aurobindo Society has made a documentary about his 1 year in prison, and it's called The Transformation. It's available in English, Hindi, and several other Indian languages on Sri Aurobindo Society's YouTube. Free, you can just go and watch it for free. It's about 55 minutes, which really gives us a summary of the transformation that he went through during that 1 year in prison. But I want to point out this one thing. During the closing statement, his lawyer, Deshbandhu Chittaranjan Das, who was a good friend of Sri Aurobindo, he said that this is not an ordinary trial, or this is not an ordinary person standing before the British court, but he's standing before the court of time, and history will remember him. History will remember this trial, and history will remember him for what he is, who he is. And he used three qualifiers, three phrases to describe Sri Aurobindo. Poet of patriotism. I've already said he was a great, wonderful writer, a fiery writer. And after 1905, he had also been, he was also giving very fiery speeches. So he was called by C.R. Das as poet of patriotism, prophet of nationalism, and lover of humanity. So this is sort of the way, we begin to understand who he was. His nationalism was not just confined to nation or a certain, certain group of humans, but he was a lover of humanity while talking about the spirit of nationalism. And that's the thing that I want to kind of bring out through some of the quotes or some of the points that I've selected. Later on, one of Sri Aurobindo's close disciples, Nalinikant Gupta, who was also a fellow revolutionary, he was in the prison with him. He was also acquitted, and he added another epithet for Sri Aurobindo, the bringer of divine life, the bringer of the supramental consciousness. You can define it, understand it in different way. But that's the yogic work that he did after he had moved to Pondicherry. But right now our concern is for these three parts: the poet of patriotism, prophet of nationalism, and lover of humanity. So when we talk about nationalism and how Sri Aurobindo explained what nationalism is, at one place he defines it very briefly, very succinctly as an expression of the nation's authentic temperament. Let's think about it just for a minute. Expression of the nation's authentic temperament. This compels us to ask two questions. What is a nation? And what do we understand by a nation's authentic temperament or its innate genius? Something that is unique to the group of people who form that nation. So these are the two questions that we will explore, and we will see that in his vision of both these questions, what is a nation and what is a nation's innate, authentic temperament or innate inner genius, innermost genius rather, we will see how he helps us decolonize our own patterns of thinking about these two questions. Now, for Sri Aurobindo, one of the things that is very clear was that India or Mother India, as he would call it, was not just a piece of land. It was not just certain mountains, rivers, certain languages, certain religions or practices or customs, but Mother India for her was a living goddess, a living power. And in fact, there are two accounts that I would like to share at this point. One is when he was in Baroda as an educator, and he had several illustrious students. One of the most illustrious students, whom I'm sure many of you already know of, the founder of Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, right? He
Kanhaiya Munshi.
Yes, K.M. Munshi ji. He has said this in his book about the time that he spent with Aurobindo Ghosh at that time. Aurobindo Ghosh, the English and French professor at Baroda. And he's talked about how in one discussion, some students were wanting to, they were saying that we want to do something for the freedom of country. And Sri Aurobindo picked up a map of India and he laid it down on the table and he said, do you see Mother in this map? If you don't, then you are not ready to sacrifice everything for the sake of her freedom. Another point I want to bring out is a famous letter of Sri Aurobindo, which came out during his trial. It was a personal letter that he had written in 1905 to his wife. I forgot to mention he did marry in 1901 to a woman named Mrinalini Devi. And in one of the letters, he talked about his 3 madnesses. It was written in Bengali, so madness is the English word that we would use. And he talked about one of the madnesses that he mentioned was that while others may see India as their country, I see her as my mother. And how can I, live a life of luxury or, have some, because he didn't live for very long periods of time with his wife because of his various works that he was taking on, that how can I live comfortably and a happy grahasth life when a demon is sitting on my mother's chest? Then later on, there is another letter of Sri Aurobindo written to a disciple from Pondicherry when somebody asked him, do you think India is Bharat Mata, mother, or India is just, like any other nation that we would speak of? Sri Aurobindo wrote a very funny, but a very somewhat, very strong reply. He said, do you take me for a materialist? If I had seen India only as a land, I wouldn't have spent so much of my life doing that I did for India's freedom, or the work that I'm doing even now as a yogi. So for him, it was very clear that India is not just a piece of earth, she's a living goddess, a living power. Now this tells us that already we have some sort of a spiritual view of looking at nation. But then Sri Aurobindo would go a little deeper. He said, in fact, if you read his entire essay on this part, he says, we have been trained by the school of thought of the West, where we are taught to see things only from an outside. But an Indian mind, an Indian view will always be to start to look at things from inside out. So he talked about how to view a nation. It would be exactly like the Indian view of who or what is an individual. We are not just what we see. There are layers of being in us. To put it very simply, there are, as the Upanishadic languages, there are different shariras in us, different bodies in us, from gross to subtle to causal to something beyond. And it is from inside out that we have to look at nation, look at culture, look at society. So what would be the outermost body of a nation? The Sthul Sharira. That would be the geography of the land. That would be the mountains, the hills, the rivers, the plateau, and things like that. That would be the Annamaya Kosha. But within this Annamaya Kosha, connected to that, this geography is meaningless if there are not people living in it. The Pran is not there, the life body of the nation. Together, these two create what is the gross body of the nation, which is the geography, the gross physical body, the Annamaya. Annamaya, Annam word in Vedic Vedantic understanding is matter. So the material, what you see, the geography of the land, and the life force, the prana of the Pranamaya Kosha. Together, these two form the Sthula Sharira of the nation. Then, in that is a subtle nation, a subtle body, a Sukshma Sharira of the nation. Just like we all are not just our bodies or the ability to breathe in and breathe out, just the life force, we have thoughts, we have feelings, we have ways to understand life, we have patterns of thinking, we create art, we create philosophies, we create visions, we create religion, all kinds of things that we do. That's part of the Manomaya Kosha, the mind body of the nation. That still does not complete the picture. Behind that is the causal body or the Karan Sharir of the nation. This is where the authentic temperament comes into play. So the causal body or the Karan Sharir of the nation is that unique, peculiar temperament that a nation develops over a period of time through its lived experience. And that is what makes it distinct, unique from others. So that Karan Sharir, it's Karan, the word itself says it causes the nation to organize its outer life, organize its Manomaya life, mind's life, and the outer life. In fact, Sri Aurobindo speaks of the culture also to understand it this way, that Indian culture has to be, or any culture has to be seen at these three levels. The soul of a culture, which would be more of the Karan Sharir, which expresses itself in the mind, in the art, the sciences, the literature, the philosophies, the higher religious thought we come out with, and how we organize the outer material life, where we have the social system, the economic systems, all that is part of the culture. So these are the three ways he says we should look at the nation also. The Sthula Sharira, which is the geography and the people, and the Manomaya Kosha or the Sukshma Sharira, and which is the mind of the nation, and the Karan Sharira, the causal body of the nation, that authentic temperament that we have to discover, which is where the soul of the nation resides. But the Indian thought does not end there. Indian thought goes even deeper, that behind these three bodies of the mother, the nation, he wrote, and within them all. Now this is interesting. It is there within all these three bodies, and behind these three bodies is the true source of her life, the nation's life. Now this source is immortal and unchanging. That is the Atman, the self, the Paramatman, the Brahman. So many words our rishis have given us to talk of that one supreme source. And nation is merely one manifestation of that source. That source is the universal Narayan, the universal supreme being, universal supreme consciousness, whatever we want to call it, the one who expresses itself in many, of whom we are all the children. Now, this is this relation between one and many is the crux of Indian thought, because there is one supreme source, but it expresses itself out in many different ways. We have the famous line from the Veda also, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. Just because there are many, it does not negate the truth of one. Just because there is one, it does not negate the truth of many. So here is a contemporary significance. When you understand the nation, our nation, for example, in this case, as one manifestation of the many possible manifestations that can come from one supreme source, there is no room for chauvinism here, because the other manifestations are just as equally true. There has to be a truth in the manifestation, because there can be nations which can, well, today politically we would consider them as nations, but they are not based on the truth of their soul. They are nations built on falsehood. And in a matter of time, over the course of time, they will disappear, or they will reintegrate themselves to their true source. But that's another discussion which we are not going, at least not now in the thing. But this is very interesting to know, that just as one nation's existence, one nation as a manifestation of that one common supreme source is true, the others are also true. But at the same time, it also insists that the truth of their being has to be there. That unique temperament, that causal body has to be there, which is where the truth of the nation resides, or through which it expresses itself. So in this grand vision, how Sri Aurobindo says, he sort of summarizes this. By the way, wherever I'm writing, the references, these are complete works of Sri Aurobindo. The CWSA stands for that. There is volume number and the page number. So volume 7 is his writings from Bande Mataram, the journal for which he was writing and for which he was later arrested because of his writings in Bande Mataram. And of course, the other work that he was doing behind. So he summarizes that when we speak of a nation, we also mean a separate culture and a civilization, a peculiar national temperament which has become too deeply rooted to be altered. And in all these, we discover a manifestation of God in national life, which is living, sacred, and adorable. It is this which we speak of as the mother. That manifestation of God in national life is what Mother India is, what Bharat Mata is. And that manifestation of God in other nations' life will be there in their own way. They have to discover it in their own way. One of his visions was the vision of human unity, which his spiritual collaborator, who moved from France to India to work with Sri Aurobindo in 1920. She first came to meet with him in 1914, and then the First World War started. So she had to leave for a few years to France, back to France, and then to Japan. From Japan, she moved back to Pondicherry, and after that, she never left. Her name is Meera Alfasa. In the Ashram Sri Aurobindo Society, we call it as simply the mother. To all devotees of Sri Aurobindo or followers of Sri Aurobindo, she's simply known as the mother. So she put that vision of Sri Aurobindo of human unity in matter when she inaugurated what is today known as Auroville, the unique experiment in human unity on the basis of psychological unity, not any outer instrument of unity. So this is the, this connects with that vision that each nation, and they have this place, like one part of Auroville is called as the international zone, where each people coming from different nations are supposed to work within themselves and work through outer activities to discover the nation's soul of their nation, of their countries. So that is the manifestation of God in national life. So the idea is through the soul we can become one, we can unite. Now, if this is the view of nation that Sri Aurobindo has given us, what is his view of nationalism? Nationalism, according to Sri Aurobindo, the quote that I'm picking up today, is it's a divinely appointed Shakti or force of the divine. And just like any other force of the divine, it is sent out, it manifests to do a certain work of the divine. And once the work is done, it goes back to its original source. It merges with its original source. So nationalism, he says, is a divinely appointed Shakti of the eternal and must do its God-given work before it returns to the bosom of the universal energy from which it came. Now, this is very interesting. People, bringing a little bit of contemporary part, people who say that the time of nationalism is over and we are living in this la-la land of internationalism, globalism, need to really ask themselves, has the work of nationalism been done? Or are we still, requiring this work of this force of nationalism? I'm going to read out 2 or 3 points and then leave it for us to kind of reflect on and contemplate on whether the work of nationalism as a force is done, or is there more that is needed? Now, Sri Aurobindo had this very interesting way of writing. He would first tell you what something is not before he would tell you what something is. That's how he wrote his the major magnum opus philosophical work, The Life Divine. Now, in Bande Mataram, he did not probably could follow it because these were short editorials, short articles, or the text of his speeches that he was giving. So, but I have followed his, practice of describing, using Sri Aurobindo's words, what nationalism is not before we go into what nationalism is. Now, all these writings came in the context of all the criticisms that he and his revolutionary group were facing at the hand of the moderate leaders of the time and at the time of and the hands of the British, who were really suppressing these nationalist voices. So Sri Aurobindo categorically, very first thing he says, nationalism is not extremism. It's not extremism in two sense. It does not in any way promote unreasonable violence of spirit, not just the physical violence, but any unreasonable violence of spirit. Just because there is a desperation, you become violent in your words, you become violent in your thought, or you become violent in action. That's not what nationalism is. Though we also know Sri Aurobindo said very clearly about himself that I'm not a pacifist. If violence is needed to attain freedom, that is what is needed. What matters is what is the intention with which is being done. But just, you want to oppose something, protest something, and you use unreasonable violence, that's not what, that's an extremist way of looking at it. That's not the nationalists' way of looking at it. Nationalism is not about advocating lawlessness for its own sake. A lot of contemporary relevance of this idea itself. In fact, he said a nationalist would have a profound reverence for the essence of law, because it's law that is needed to have a sound and healthy national life. So when they were protesting certain British policies, it's not because they had hatred against some sort of a hatred against the law, but rather, he said, what is needed is that the law has to be an outgrowth of the nation's organic existence. And the British law was not coming out of the organic temperament of the nation, Indian nation. Rather, it was an imposition and it was serving certain colonial ends. This is one of the key things about understanding Sri Aurobindo's revolutionary work. Anytime any of the other leaders, even later on when he moved to Pondicherry, there were many, he used to hold talks with a lot of, they are called as evening talks, or, even like correspondence with several of his disciples, many of whom were, with him during revolutionary days, but many of whom were also drawn to other freedom fighters. In fact, there were several Gandhians who came to meet Sri Aurobindo and asked him about, what is needed for India's freedom and things like that. And one of the things Sri Aurobindo always insisted was that no matter what any other leader at that time was saying, that first we need to resolve our caste problem. First, we need to resolve our Harijan problem. First, we need to resolve our Hindu-Muslim problem. Sri Aurobindo said all these problems come later. First comes the need for our political freedom so we can draw our own destiny. We can create our own destiny. Everything will happen based on what we as a nation find what is suitable and what resonates with our own temperament, rather than moralistic preaching or Tolstoyan ideas or any other external influence. We have to discover our own innate temperament. So the law has to be an outgrowth of the nation's organic existence, and law has to be understood as something made for people. Not people are not made for law. So he said, even though we have a profound respect and reverence for the essence of law, the spirit of law, not always the word, but we do not accept law as a fetish, that just because this is what the law says, security, peace, this cannot be an aim in themselves, because otherwise revolutionaries would not have been able to work. So this is how he explained what nationalism is not. But what is a nationalist, or who is a nationalist? That's what I want to go next. So who is a nationalist according to Sri Aurobindo? Again, I have pulled out just this one quote. You see, his writings are so humongous to find just the right words to sort of really bring out the essence of his vision. It was really a very interesting process or a meditation for me as well. So I'm thankful to NLD to give me that opportunity to really, cult some of these words. So Sri Aurobindo, in one of his editorial, wrote, "Let no man dare to call himself a nationalist if he does so merely with a sort of intellectual pride. If you are going to be a nationalist, you must do it in the religious spirit." Now, Sri Aurobindo was writing at a time where we don't, we have to understand when he's using the word religious, he's not using it in the sense of an organized religion. He's using it in the sense of dharma. So he's writing to an audience who are still very ingrained with the kind of colonial understanding or the Eurocentric understanding of certain words. For him, in his mind, it is clear because he has used different words at different times. He even coined a word to distinguish between religion and dharma. He even coined a word called religionism. So religionism is what we would understand as organized religion, and religion, he would even sort of use it in exchange for, as a substitute for dharma. So you must do the work in the dharmic spirit. You must remember, and what is this religious spirit or the dharmic spirit? That you are an instrument of God for the salvation of your own country. You must live as the instruments of God. So this is such a deep spiritual view of what it means to work as a nationalist, to work for our own country, to be the instruments of God. See it not because you are doing it as some sort of a chauvinistic, pride in your nation, but that you are an instrument of God who's been assigned this work to work towards. At that time, it was the freedom of the country. Today, it can be anything else. In any work, actually, any work can be done as instrument of God with this attitude of instruments of God, and God reflected in our own country. God that is manifesting as national life in our own country. Now, what is this nationalism? For him, nationalism was 2-3 things. Nationalism is, I said, Shakti of the eternal. It's a divine Shakti, divine force. It expresses itself as an aspiration, as a deep yearning. What is this yearning for? For the realization of the divine unity. Now, why this is so important? Because it comes straight from our Vedantic vision, Vedic vision of existence, of oneness. It's the realization of that oneness which expresses itself as unity in the nation. So nationalism for him is a yearning, is an aspiration for that divine oneness, that divine unity in the nation. This unity must come on the foundation of an essential equality. Just as, the Veda says, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, when there are many, the Indra, the Maruts, the Varuna, the Mitra, all the Vedic gods, Matrishwan, all those who are listed in that hymn of Rig Veda, they are separate, but they are essentially equal. They are different powers of that one. And that's why they are known by different names. So this unity has to be realized on the foundation of essential equality between individual and an individual, between jati and jati, between class and class. I mean, I kept the word caste and caste because that's the word, English word that he was using at that time. But we know that he has done a very thorough criticism of the Western view of understanding caste and bringing out the Indian wisdom of what Varna is, what it is supposed to be. And he's taken it beyond, like in a futuristic way, what is the future of that Varna system as well. But that's not where we are going today. So all are different, but equal and united parts of that Virat Purusha, that cosmic being which expresses at the gross physical level as realized in the nation. So in the Rig Veda, we have the image of that cosmic Purusha who is sacrificed so that this one cosmic being becomes many. And at the level of the gross level, he is known, the spirit that is there behind the gross body is called as Virat Purusha. We know this from our Bhagavad Gita also, the Virat Roop, when Krishna shows his Virat Roop to Arjuna. That's at the level of manifestation. So at the level of manifestation, they are all united in that golden Virat Purusha. But they are all different but equal parts of that one Virat Purusha, the Virat being. Virat means one who is spread everywhere, as it's reflected in the nation. So this is how he's looking at the nation also from that Vedic Vedantic vision. And finally, he says any social political system that either we come up with or that is imposed on us from any outside, source, if they deny this essential equality, a nationalist has no tolerance for it. You see, this has such great implication for us to assess any policies or any ways of patterns of thinking that are imposed on us. We may have become politically free, but we still carry in our governance structures, in our political structures, in our legal structures, in our educational policies, a lot of the colonial patterns of thinking. So anything that denies this essential equality at the level of the soul, at the level of the temperament, the unique soul element, that should not be tolerated. Any policy that creates inequality at any level between people, one group of people and another, that should not be tolerated. The attempt should be to go back to the essential equality and also the outer difference, and to harmonize the two. So there are lots of great significance one can, a political thinker, a sociological thinker can find from these views of nationalism. So it was this spirit of nationalism which Sri Aurobindo was sort of constantly working with in coming up with his policies, his strategies for various Congress sessions that he attended, for various ideas that he was throwing out through his Bande Mataram writings, through his speeches, the revolutionary work. He had a 5-point program, all the things that we know today as, which became popular after 1915 or so, the boycott, Swaraj, all of these policies were first drafted and explained, and their spirit was explained by Sri Aurobindo in his writings in Bande Mataram. National education was one of the 5 points of his full comprehensive program for Indian national freedom, national arbitration courts as well. Somewhere later on, the idea of national education got dropped after Sri Aurobindo and several others sort of went away from the active political scene. But in Bengal, we still have something called, in Kolkata, called National Council of Education, which was the direct outcome of his work on national education that he and several others were doing at that time. So on the basis of this spirit of nationalism, he says, our aim, the aim of the nationalists at that time, is to build up India not for her sake only, but for the sake of humanity. And this is very important because for him, India's rise is always meant for the rise of humanity. Why it is so, I'll just come to that briefly. But I just want to, I chose this picture just to kind of emphasize this point. This is the portrait of Sri Aurobindo that is there in the Rashtrapati Bhavan. It was done by an artist at the ashram, Pramod Kumar Bhattacharya, and mother had specifically asked him to paint a portrait, and the Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch was instrumental in getting it done. This was at the time when Nehru was the Prime Minister and Rajendra Prasad was the president. All right, so just another picture from his revolutionary days, but this is after his prison sojourn, after his prison experience. This is in 1909. He was released on May 5th, May 6th, I believe. I'm forgetting the date, either May 5th or May 6th, 1909. And after that, he really was kind of invited to speak at various places. But the quote that I have there is from an earlier writing. Why I said he was so insistent on complete Swaraj, Purna Swaraj, he used that word. Why India must have Swaraj in order to live for the world, not as a slave for the material and political benefit of a single purse-proud, that is economically proud and selfish nation, but a free people for the spiritual and intellectual benefit of the human race. This is very important because when Sri Aurobindo immersed himself to kind of find what the soul of India was during his Baroda period, he was convinced that spirituality is the soul of India. The Indian authentic temperament is always to see things beyond or behind what we see on the outside. We are always seeking a higher or a deeper truth behind the material truth that we see, behind the material reality that we see. So this India, this only India can give to the world. Now, he said at one place that it does not mean that other cultures or other nations have not had their phases of times of their spiritual inquiry, but India is the only one which has preserved that memory. Not just preserved the memory, but it's a living truth. That is why we have the Veda as preserved. Even though lots of branches, lots of shakhas of the Veda are lost, yet what has been preserved is exactly what people were chanting, say, 8,000 or 10,000 years ago, depending on how we understand our history and what archaeological evidence we want to believe in. But at least 5,000 to 8,000 years ago for sure. So why that has been able to preserve? There is some truth to that oral tradition, the oral chanting tradition, which preserved that, but also because that has been the soul of this nation. That is why from time to time we have seen so many avatars come on this land. He spoke of, he's actually written about it, of India as the last spiritual battlefield, where the last spiritual battle between truth and falsehood will be fought. And that's why India has to rise to first to its own spiritual truth, to first to its own spiritual, first to its own soul. It has to recognize She has to recognize first her own soul so that she can become a leader for rest of the humanity. He said this is the task, at least in this Chatur Yuga, that has been assigned to India. See, he was a spiritual visionary. He was a mystic. He was a yogi. For him, time is not what we understand as, so 2000 to 2025. He was living in eternity. So he said, in this Chatur Yuga, at least, the task of raising humanity to a spiritual way of existence is on shoulders of India. That is why India must have Swaraj. Swaraj is a term straight from the Veda. It means self-rule. Self, what is this self? The self that is a portion of the divine. That is a projection of the divine. That is the Atman. So first we have to find this Swaraj. We have to conquer ourselves, conquer our lower nature, allow the spirit in us to rule. And only the one who has found that Swaraj can become Samrat. Both these terms are straight from the Veda, Swaraj and Samrat. Only then he can become, or she can become, the ruler of others, Samrat. So, but while all his work was going on as a nationalist, as a revolutionary, nation, Sri Aurobindo said, is not the highest synthesis to which truth can go. The higher synthesis, something higher than nation, is humanity. And I've already given you 2-3 examples from his own writings, his own speeches as to, India must rise for the sake of the humanity. So humanity is a higher synthesis than nation, but higher than humanity is, why leave out all the other living beings? Why leave out other creatures? So a still higher synthesis would be all the living beings of the earth, right? The aspiring world of creatures. But beyond that is the Vedantic synthesis, the synthesis of God, the synthesis of one, where many become part of the one and yet keep their distinction. This does not only mean only the animate, living beings, living creatures, but why not matter? Why not other worlds that we don't see, the other, other realities? There is a world of ideas. There is a world of feelings, the vital world. We have something called, Gandharva Lok, right? Where all the music is supposed to come from. There are people in Manipur who consider themselves as descendants of the Gandharvas, descending straight from that world where these celestial singers were creating music. So all those worlds get synthesized in the highest synthesis, that is the synthesis of God. So we get a sense that nation is one of the many larger unities that we must aspire to. But nation is the first important unity to which we must have to aspire and in which we must live if we want to go to the next higher. So I just have this one quote from Sri Aurobindo to sort of highlight that point, that we must live as a nation before we can live in humanity. So nation, Sri Aurobindo said, is the highest psychological unity to which man has arrived successfully. Many of you may know the story of Vishnu as the Vaman avatar, when he takes 3 steps, right? The first 3 steps that he takes, Sri Aurobindo sort of gave a very symbolic interpretation of those 3 steps of Vishnu, where he said the first step is the first level of unity to which human being comes at, which is the unity of the family. So first we are an individual being, we go together with family, that's a larger unity. So it's sort of like working on our own egos when we work for the family, when we live together as a family. That, Sri Aurobindo said, nature has perfected. Second is the unity of the nation. Nature has more or less perfected that, but yet a lot of work remains. The third step of the Vishnu is going beyond nation to the unity of humanity, the human unity. But first, the nation's unity has to be perfected before we can talk about living together as human beings, no, the John Lennon song of, no boundaries, no nations, nothing like that. It's very nice as a dream, but it has to be practically first realized in the nation. All right. So another term that was that Sri Aurobindo and his fellow revolutionaries gave themselves were, they called themselves as new nationalists, because by this time there were also, the moderates were also saying, we are also working in the national interest. Why do you say that we are not working in the national interest? So there are several writings in which Sri Aurobindo speaks of what our new nationalism stands for. But for now, I have chosen one unfinished essay, The Bourgeois and the Samurai. And I personally think this should be a compulsory reading for all students in our colleges and universities. And the object of the new nationalism is defined in that writing, where he says, what is the aim of the new nationalism is to create a new nation in India by reviving in spirit and action ancient Indian character, the strong, great, and lofty spirit of old Aryavrata, and setting it to use and mold the methods and materials of modernity for the freedom, greatness, and well-being of a historic and immortal people. Indian nation is an old nation, but we have to bring a new nation by reviving the spirit of the ancient immortal character. That is the character of the Arya that he spoke about. In fact, one of the journals that he started after moving to Pondicherry, 1914 to 1921, which became the platform on which all his major works came out first as chapter by chapter. He was serializing those, whether it was The Life Divine, The Synthesis of Yoga, his essays on Indian culture, Indian art, national education. National education were written earlier. The Ideal of Human Unity, his Psychology of Social Development, which is now sold in the book form as The Human Cycle, and several other, these were the key works. His writings on the Veda, how can I forget that? Secret of the Veda, his commentaries on Isha Upanishad and several other Kain Upanishads and several other, writings, that they were all first serialized in Arya. He called that journal Arya with this very intention that that word has to be understood. So the spirit or the work of new nationalists were to transform the bourgeois, the typical middle class mentality, into the warrior, into the samurai that was needed. So samurai, the equivalent in Indian language would be the kshatriya. And Arya, Sri Aurobindo said, is a perfect synthesis of the Kshatra Tej and the Brahma Tej. So the Brahmin is the one who pursues the higher knowledge, knowledge of things beyond what we see in the material reality. That is the spiritual knowledge, the knowledge of my true self. One who pursues the knowledge of the higher self is Brahman. And one who pursues the, who is in pursuit of deeper courage and power is the Kshatriya. Arya synthesizes these two temperaments. So I'll just quickly go over how briefly what he defines as the Aryan temperament. Aryan, as he writes in one of his Vedic writings also, that the term that came up in the Veda was, it depicted a certain kind of high aspiration for a particular type of self-culture, training oneself, practicing an inner and outer practice. Yesterday, Nidhi was saying, you had a little taste of, yoga or meditation. All that comes part of the inner practice to develop certain powers within, of certain ideal life, of a certain high aspiration. All that acculturation is the work of the Arya. So Arya word means sort of one who is battling within against all lower nature everything that stands opposed to the higher advance. It's an effort, it's an uprising, it's an overcoming. He has actually done a very deep etymological analysis of the word Arya itself, where each of the meanings he describes and how that word, see, he started writing that journal in 1914, just around that time, as if he was sort of prophetic in his understanding of why there was need to bring the true meaning of this word, because this word was taken up and abused so much at the hand of fascists and Nazis later on. So he had to sort of really bring out the truth of that word. And he said, Sanatan Dharma is the Dharma of the Aryas. It's not a racial term in any way. It depicts a certain ideal, a certain practice of self-culture, growing in a certain self-culture. Then the first law of the Aryan temperament is Swaraj, self-conquest, conquering our lower nature, everything that brings me down, whether it is jealousy, pettiness, anger, rage, mental preferences, mental biases, tamas, and we have to reject all of that, conquer all of that, and seek truth, right, height, and freedom, a higher truth in all that we do. That is the meaning of Arya, and the work of Indian nationalists truly is to cultivate this Aryan temperament. Now, I mentioned I know we are coming close to the end, so I'll just finish with a few more thoughts, because this is a very important document. I said the bourgeois and the samurai should be read by everyone. There are 2-3 writings of Sri Aurobindo that must be read by every college student and university student. This is one of them. This is the speech he gave after coming out of the prison in 1909. It was less than a month. So if he was released on May 5th, May 30th. This is a little place in Bengal, and they have still preserved the chair on which he sat when he reached there to deliver the speech. The speech was at the park of, the outer compound of Jai Krishna Public Library. This is the building of that, library, an old photo of that library. In the prison, Sri Aurobindo had a deep transformative experience. Now, when I was giving the summary of his life, I did not say anything about his yogic life. I only focused on his educational and revolutionary life. In 1904, Sri Aurobindo had some very profound spiritual realization, which today we would speak of as the Nirvana experience. So in 1904, itself, he had that experience. But in the prison, he had another major transformative realization, which is the realization we know as dynamic Brahman. So Nirvana is the static Brahman, the static divine. And this realization is the dynamic divine. What that means is where he saw Vasudeva, Sri Krishna, in every object, in every individual around him. When he was taken to the court for his trial, he saw in the prosecutor, he saw Sri Krishna. In prosecutor's pen, he saw Sri Krishna. In the judge's face, he saw Sri Krishna. In the bars of his cell, he saw Sri Krishna. For several days, he was in constant communion with Sri Krishna. And all that is part of that documentary that I mentioned. It's really a marvelous, it's a marvelous film. But on May 30th, 1909, Sri Aurobindo was invited to give a speech on what is Sanatan Dharma. It was organized by a group called Promotion of Religion or something like that. And Sri Aurobindo had nothing in his mind as to what he was going to speak, but he stood there and he meditated, and everything that he had experienced in the prison with Sri Krishna came out as the speech. And he talked about the 2 Adesh, the 2 commands that he received from Sri Krishna in the prison. And Sri Krishna, you have to understand that Sri Aurobindo had, even after his experience of the nirvana, he still had some sort of an agnostic streak in him. He wrote that in his letter to his wife also, that if there is a God. So he was kind of like always questioning. In that letter he had written to his wife, he said, if there is a God, I want to see him. You see, so there was an agnostic and there was this, seeker in him, that I want to see if there is a God. So this doubt, whatever little doubt that he had, all that was washed off during his prison experience with Sri Krishna. So the truth of Sanatan Dharma was revealed to him in the prison, which became his Uttarpara speech. And I have a whole talk about the significance of that speech, but I'm just going to read out few things. This is earlier this year, I had a chance to go to the Uttarpara library, the Jai Kishan library. That's where this plaque is from. One of the commands he had from Sri Krishna was, this was totally Sri Krishna dictating to him, that I am doing the work that is needed to raise this nation. I am the one work. You thought you were doing freedom work, work for the freedom of the nation. I am the one who is doing the work. So Sri Aurobindo actually later also has said that he learned the true Karma Yoga in prison with Sri Krishna as his teacher. So one of the voices that he was hearing was that Sri Krishna is raising this nation to send forth his word. What is that word? The word is the Sanatan Dharma, the eternal path, the eternal Dharma. Dharma is, there is no other word in English language which can describe what Dharma is. Dharma is that which sustains. It's the truth in action, which sustains the entire existence. So it is for Sanatan Dharma that I am helping India rise. Sri Aurobindo speaks in that speech, but it is through him, the voice of Sri Krishna. It is for the world and not for themselves that they arise. When it is said that India shall rise, it is the Sanatan Dharma that shall rise. When it is said that India shall be great, it is the Sanatan Dharma that shall be great. This, by the way, is a portrait of Sri Aurobindo done by his younger brother, who was again a grand revolutionary in his time. He was also imprisoned at the same time. He was sent to Andaman Nicobar, the cellular jail. He was not acquitted, but in 1920, I think something had happened after Jallianwala Bagh, and after all that protests, I think some emperor was coming or queen was coming, and a lot of political prisoners were pardoned. So that time he was pardoned along with several others. So he was in the cellular jail. And then he came and he stayed in the ashram for some time, and he learned painting. Now, just to bring this to a close, another important document that Sri Aurobindo, we must spend some time reflecting on as we deepen our understanding of his political work or his vision for the future of world, future of India, future of humanity, is the message that he had given on the eve of India's independence. It was a message that was broadcast on All India Radio Trichy. They had requested him for a message. He did not read it out. He had sent them the message. And in that message, I'm not just going to read all this. I can give this to Nidhi ji if anybody wants. They can go through the presentation and spend some time at the references also. In that message he spoke of his 5 visions, 5 dreams. The first dream was free and united India. He said India is free, but India is not united. We know there was partition. The Indian freedom came with this scar of partition, as if, the arm of India was sort of cut off on 2 sides. 2 arms were cut off at that time. The second dream was resurgence of Asia. So as if to sort of balance the world. And we see this happening today if we look at what the trends, the world situation, the geopolitics of the world these days. His third dream was world unity, but not an externally imposed unity through some administrative mechanisms, but rather a unity through the soul. The first experiment of that is being done just close to Pondicherry in Auroville. The fourth dream is that already there is, even at that time it had started. Today, so there is a lot more of that. The waking up of the world to the spiritual gift that India has to give. So spiritual gift of India to the world, more and more that. But he said to do that, first India has to recognize what spiritual gems, what spiritual gifts our ancestors have bestowed on us. And the final step, the final dream that he spoke of is an evolution of consciousness from mind to some plane of consciousness higher than mind, which he called as supermind. For that also we have to understand his experiences with Swami Vivekananda, his communion with Swami Vivekananda in prison. See, Swami Vivekananda had already left his body by that time. But for 15 days, Sri Aurobindo heard him consciously, very clearly during his prison. That's why that prison cell is a tapasya sthal, right? So Swami Vivekananda had pointed out to him that how to go as he's ascending in consciousness to get to something beyond mind. But Sri Aurobindo was the one who gave that plane of consciousness the word supermind. I'm not going into the philosophy of what that is, but it has a seed. The root of it goes back to the Vedic philosophy, the Vedic vision. But the point that I want to bring out is that none of these dreams, the first 4 dreams, are possible in their true essence if we don't fulfill the 5th dream, which is if we don't work on ourselves to evolve and to ascend in consciousness. We are not even at the mental, rational, intellectual consciousness. Most of the time we are operating from what in integral yoga we understand as the vital consciousness, the consciousness of the life play, where we are driven by our impulses, our desires, our petty opinions. These opinions don't mean anything. These are preferences of our vital nature, our temperament, our outer temperament, our lower nature. Most of the time we are operating from that. So from that we have to rise to higher and higher level of consciousness. Only then these other dreams are possible. Even the fact of united India, the Akhand Bharat, many people use that term. But for him, for Sri Aurobindo said, there is no other, it's not Akhand because the soul of India is indivisible. We may not have the Akhand Bharat as one major political entity. It could take different forms. It could be a federation. But the soul of India is one. Rest of it has to work out. How it happens. But he has, when we read this document, we find he's given some examples of common political action, common social action that can be done to bring people together in spirit. But a lot has also happened since then, which will make this vision of united India difficult if we don't evolve in consciousness. That's the point that I wanted to bring that point. And just I'll close with this. I mentioned earlier that he was very concerned about education, national education, as a way to bring the true Swaraj of the mind, the true decolonized mind of India. And he was concerned about what he said as the divorce that has happened of present India from the past. And he's writing, about 100 years ago, that divorce actually became even more stringent after independence, our political independence, where we just let go of all the wealth, the spiritual and intellectual wealth of the past. Even at that time, of course, because the British were there, so naturally the British system of education, the Macaulay system of education that we know, they had cut Indian mind, Indian heart, Indian soul from the spiritual and intellectual past of their civilization. And the result was that we lost original thinking. We lost high aspiration. And that is what we need to bring it back by connecting ourselves to the past, but to use it to solve modern problems in a modern way. That, he said, is the mission of nationalism, to recover Indian thought, Indian character, Indian perceptions, Indian greatness, and to solve the problems that perplex the world in an Indian spirit. And for that, he's also warned that we cannot be exclusively concerned about political or the economic side of things. We have to bring everything, which is our religion, our dharma, our philosophy, our art, our literature, everything has to be studied, has to be brought, understood in a new light. That is the immemorial Aryan spirit that we have to awaken into, and we have to sort of get to before we can really rise as a nation. So I know I've just taken the full time that Nidhi you gave me, so I apologize, but it's such a dear topic, such a heartfelt topic to me. So I'll stop. Any quick comments or questions we can take?